The Great Barrier Reef Marine Park was not always as we know it to be today. Over 7,000 years ago, there were Aboriginal groups and Torres Strait people living on beaches that are now submerged. For a time, after the old reef had formed, these traditional owners learned to adapt to a new way of life that was centered around the new growth coral colonies. Colonization and patterns of displacement from European settlement, however, led to very few Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people being able to carry out cultural history. Efforts to preserve the delicate corals of the Great Barrier Reef date back to the early 1960s. In Queensland, Australia, two main conservation societies focused on protecting the Great Barrier Reef: the Wildlife Preservation Society of Queensland and the Queensland Littoral Society. In 1968, the Queensland government opened up the entire Queensland coastline to oil exploration. By 1970, 6 exploration holes had been drilled by different companies in the reef area. On January 21, 1970, the Queensland Trades and Labour Council threw its support behind the reef campaign by approving black bans on all mining and drilling activities on the reef. In 1975, the Australian government opened the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. Currently, there are over 50 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander groups with the authority of Sea Country. As recognized by Great Barrier Marine Park authorities, many people work tirelessly through their communities and various Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organizations to maintain the remaining heritage values of the reef, managing sea country, recording oral tradition, and expressing living culture.
Protected Planet IUCN has the Great Barrier Reef listed as having multiple different IUCN categories. The Great Barrier Reef is also known as a dual UNESCO World Heritage Site, both natural and cultural.
Coral bleaching has been a large threat facing the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park since the late 1990s. Aerial surveillance footage was taken of the Great Barrier Reef, and scientists were able to collect data on the percentage of reef area that was affected by coral bleaching. The most intense coral bleaching event on record occurred in 1998. According to reports from the Australian Institute of Marine Science, mild bleaching was detected in areas starting as early as January of that year and then intensified by late February and early March. The Great Barrier Reef has experienced 6 mass bleachings since the early 1990s. In 2016, nearly 93% of the reef bleached.
Experts at the Australian Institute of Marine Science say that the likely primary cause of coral bleaching in the Great Barrier Reef is a mixture of rising ocean temperatures and increased solar radiation. Another factor that is likely contributing to coral bleaching at such a rapid pace is lower salinity on some inshore and offshore reefs. Increased solar radiation that is coming from the thinning ozone layer in the upper atmosphere also plays a role in the rising ocean temperatures. Lower onshore salinity rates are due to several factors, including freshwater flooding and tropical cyclones. Corals are sensitive organisms that can only tolerate minor changes in their environment.
But what is causing these mass bleaching events? Higher carbon emissions worldwide. Many factors are contributing to rising CO2 levels in the atmosphere. Gasoline-powered cars, big oil companies, and reliance on non-renewable energy sources, to name a few. Higher carbon emissions in the atmosphere means that more greenhouse gases are being trapped underneath the lower atmospheric levels. The rising atmospheric temperature is what causes ocean temperatures to slowly increase. Coral bleaching is directly caused by rising ocean temperatures because of the relationship between seawater salinity, coral calcification, and the aragonite saturation state of seawater.
Second to climate change, water quality is a huge risk to our reef.
Dissolved inorganic nitrogen is a pollutant to the reef. We use it on farms in the form of a fertiliser. If the nitrogen from the fertiliser isn't taken up by the plants, it often gets washed into creeks and rivers and ends up accumulating in the inshore areas of our reef.
Small amounts nitrogen is fine. It's in excessive amounts after high flow events where it can create algal blooms in our inshore area of our Great Barrier Reef.
Invasive species are a threat that almost every ecosystem around the world faces. These species introduce many complications to all aspects of an ecosystem. In the Great Barrier Reef marine area, crown-of-thorn starfish are growing in a population at a rapid rate, which is causing destruction and habitat loss. An adult crown-of-thorn starfish has an enormous appetite for eating hard coral, consuming up to 10 meters of coral a year.
This framework assesses 4 key components: exposure, colony response, spatial extent, and prevalence.
Based on these factors, the impact of bleaching events is classified on a 1 to 5 scale, with each category representing the severity of the event.
2016 and 17, the Australian government founded the Reef Restoration and Adaptation Program. This has been a key aspect of why effective environmental planning has been necessary to combat the threats inside the reef. Part of this project has been helping research and fund heat-tolerant coral hybrids. In their research, they found that with crossbreeding, they saw an equal or higher growth and survival rates of hybrids compared with the purebred species.
Since the late 1990s, there have been dedicated efforts to understand and protect this fragile ecosystem. A study published by Royal Society conducted a long-term monitoring survey along the whole reef, starting in 1996. That was again surveyed in 2016 following the mass coral bleaching. This long-term monitoring falls under a management principle dealing with threats may require long-term activity. In 2003, Reef Authority created an education program called Reef Guardian School that has partnered with over 300 schools. In 2014, the program launched a new initiative called Reef Guardians in Action that helps fund schools to complete projects on protecting the Great Barrier Reef, which is how they are helping use community education to reduce the threats inside the protected area.
The Reef Authority uses reef health impact surveys which provide data on reef conditions of coral health to make management decisions. One of the surveys they use is called the Rapid Monitoring Survey. This monitoring and evaluation tool has evolved over 10 years, with participants gathering data on reef conditions such as a coral disease and damage. Since 2009, over 10,415 surveys have been completed, enhancing adaptive management and stewardship across reef regions.
In 2003, in an effort to help manage tourism inside the park, the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority developed 8 different types of zones. These zones establish where tourists are allowed to recreate and what types of recreation that is allowed. The tourist zones include the general use zone and the conservation zone. The national park also allows for tourist recreation but restricts some recreation activities like fishing and extraction of anything from the area. Areas like the buffer and habitat zones allow for tourist recreation only by permit and hold other special restrictions. The preservation zone is also known as the no-go zone, where no one is allowed to enter in an effort for conservation. When a reef area is identified as being impacted, special management zones can temporarily restrict boat traffic, fishing, or other tourist activities that could harm the reef during its recovery.
Due to the potential for oil spills that could occur in the area, the Australian Marine Safety Authority has developed a response plan to prepare and mitigate risk, called Reef Plan. The original plan was published in 1987 and was updated in 1995. Reef Plan is now a part of a more comprehensive plan called the Reef 2050 Long-Term Sustainability Plan, whose purpose is to help protect and manage the reef until 2050. Reef Plan is important to help not just respond to potential oil spills, but to also prevent them, as prevention is the #1 key to risk management. This plan has thus been successful.